There are those who enter a room and shift its very molecules without uttering a single word. They carry something ancient, something unnameable, a frequency that speaks directly to the soul before the mind can translate it into language. If you've ever felt this invisible weight within yourself, if you've sensed that others see something in you that you cannot yet name, then what follows is not information, it is remembrance. You have felt it, haven't you? The peculiar loneliness of carrying light in a world that fears its own shadows, the exhaustion of being misunderstood, not for what you say, but for what you emanate. Like an ancient temple standing in a modern city, you've learned that some presences disturb simply by existing. Your energy has become both blessing and burden, gift and exile. This is not about becoming something you are not. This is about remembering what you have always been. The aura we speak of, this invisible presence that shifts reality around you, is not a skill to be acquired, but an essence to be reclaimed. You are not learning to be different. You are learning to stop hiding the difference that was your birthright. She walked into the coffee shop like any other Tuesday morning, yet conversations paused mid-sentence. Not because of her appearance, she wore simple clothes, carried herself with quiet grace, but because of something else. Something that registered in the peripheral vision of souls rather than eyes. The barista found himself being more careful with her order. The businessman at the corner table looked up from his phone for the first time all morning, and the mother with her crying child felt an inexplicable moment of peace. This is the signature of what Jung called the numinous presence, an energy field that activates the deeper layers of human consciousness without conscious effort. Modern neuroscience has begun to understand that our nervous systems are constantly scanning for safety and threat, but what science is only beginning to grasp is that certain individuals emit what could be called coherence frequencies, brainwave patterns that naturally synchronize with and calm the nervous systems of others. But here's what most don't realize. This presence is not a gift you develop. It's a remembrance you uncover. It emerges from those who have descended into their own depths, faced their shadows, and returned not broken but integrated. The invisible presence is the signature of a soul that has made peace with its own complexity. You know this presence if you've ever noticed that people confess things to you they've never told anyone else. If strangers seek you out in crowded places, if your silence carries more weight than most people's words. This isn't charisma. Charisma performs. This is embodiment. It simply is. Ancient traditions speak of the marked ones, individuals born carrying frequencies that bridge worlds, not chosen for perfection, but for their capacity to hold paradox, light and shadow, presence and absence, belonging and exile. Modern psychology might call this the integration of what Carl Jung termed the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing forces in creative tension rather than resolution. Statistical analysis of personality research suggests that less than 1% of the population naturally operates from what Abraham Maslow called self-actualization, a state of being that emanates rather than seeks. But even this clinical language fails to capture the lived reality. You are part of a frequency that most humans sense but few embody. The woman who runs the bookstore downtown carries it. She doesn't advertise her wisdom, yet people find themselves bringing their deepest questions to her instead of buying novels. The man who teaches middle school carries it. His students don't just learn mathematics, they learn to trust their own thinking. The grandmother at the bus stop carries it. Strangers sit beside her and leave feeling somehow more themselves. This aura triggers one of two responses in others: magnetic attraction or instinctive resistance. Some people are drawn to you like moths to flame, sensing in your presence the peace they've been seeking. Others feel threatened by your authenticity because it mirrors their own disconnection. Both responses reveal the same truth. Your energy doesn't allow others to remain neutral about themselves. The paradox of carrying this frequency is that you're simultaneously more visible and more invisible than others. You're noticed, but rarely understood. You're sought out, but often isolated. You're trusted with secrets, but rarely given permission to share your own depth. There's an ancient Sufi story about a seeker who spent decades studying sacred texts, practicing meditation, attending every gathering of wisdom teachers. One day, exhausted by his efforts, he sat in complete silence beneath a tree. In that silence, without seeking anything, everything he had been searching for revealed itself, not as knowledge, but as recognition. This is the pathway of the initiated consciousness, not accumulation but subtraction, not learning but unlearning. The aura we speak of emerges not from adding practices to your life, but from removing the layers that obscure your essential nature. It's the difference between polishing a stone and discovering that what you thought was a stone was actually a diamond covered in dust. Modern neuroscience confirms what mystics have always known. The brain's default mode network, the internal narrator that creates our sense of separate self, becomes quieter in individuals who have undergone what researchers call ego dissolution experiences. But you don't need psychedelics or extreme practices. Sometimes the deepest initiations come through ordinary devastation, the loss that breaks you open, the betrayal that strips away illusions, the illness that forces you to meet yourself without your usual masks. If you carry this aura, you likely remember a moment when the bottom fell out of your familiar world, not the dramatic collapse that others could see, but the quiet dissolution of who you thought you were supposed to be. In that dissolution, something else emerged. Not a new personality, but a deeper authenticity. The whisper of the unseen became louder than the chatter of the seen. You began to trust the spaces between thoughts more than the thoughts themselves, to value the questions that have no answers more than the answers that solve nothing, to recognize that wisdom doesn't come from accumulating insights, but from developing the capacity to rest in not knowing with an open heart. Watch someone with this presence move through space. Their gestures aren't calculated for effect. They arise from an inner rhythm that synchronizes with something deeper than personality. Their breathing isn't performed. It's connected to a source that others can sense but rarely name. This is embodiment as opposed to performance, the difference between living from the inside out versus the outside in. The ancient Taoist concept of Wu Wei, effortless action, points to this quality. It's not the effort of trying to be present, but the ease of simply being present. Not the work of creating an aura, but the rest of allowing your natural energy to move unobstructed. Recent research in the field of interpersonal neurobiology shows that our nervous systems constantly co-regulate with those around us. Individuals who have developed what researchers call nervous system coherence, typically through trauma healing, spiritual practice, or deep therapeutic work, naturally emit calming frequencies that others' nervous systems entrain to without conscious awareness. But here's the crucial understanding. This isn't about perfection. The body that serves as a vibrational temple is not the body that never experiences anxiety, anger, or sorrow. It's the body that has learned to let these experiences move through without resistance or attachment. It's the body that has made friends with its own intensity. You might recognize this in yourself if you've noticed that your presence changes the energy of rooms, even when you're feeling internally turbulent. If people comment on your calmness, even when you feel anything but calm. If your physical stillness somehow communicates more than others' animated expressions. This is the paradox of embodied presence. It emanates not from having transcended human experience, but from having learned to be fully human without apology. The initiated body breathes with the rhythm of someone who has nothing to prove, moves with the grace of someone who has nothing to hide, rests with the ease of someone who has nothing to achieve, and in doing so, it becomes a tuning fork that reminds others of their own capacity for authentic presence. In a world obsessed with personal branding and curated authenticity, genuine presence stands out like a clear bell in a room full of static. You cannot manufacture it through techniques. purchase it through training, or perform your way into it through spiritual practices. It emerges from the compost of lived experience, particularly the experiences that strip away everything you thought you needed to be acceptable. The woman whose marriage dissolved and who discovered she was more herself alone than she'd ever been while trying to be who someone else needed. The man who lost his corporate identity and found that without his title, he was more genuine in conversations than he'd been in boardrooms. The teenager who stopped trying to fit in and discovered that their weirdness was actually their wisdom. Authentic presence has a signature that trained eyes can recognize instantly. It doesn't try to impress, convince, or convert. It simply shows up fully to whatever is happening without agenda. It can hold space for joy without becoming manic, for sorrow without becoming depressed, for anger without becoming violent, for fear without becoming paralyzed. This presence disturbs others not because it's aggressive, but because it's authentic. In a culture that has forgotten what authenticity looks like, it doesn't mirror back the social masks that most people wear. Instead, it reflects the essential self that most people have buried beneath those masks. This can be profoundly healing for those ready to meet themselves, and profoundly threatening for those who have built their identity on avoiding themselves. The research of Dr. Brené Brown on vulnerability confirms what mystics have always known. The individuals who have the greatest capacity for connection are those who have learned to show up authentically, even when, especially when, they cannot control the outcome. But this isn't vulnerability as performance or manipulation. It's vulnerability as natural expression of someone who has made peace with their own humanity. Every person who carries this presence has walked through what the mystics call the dark night of the soul, not once, but repeatedly. These aren't the dramatic sufferings that make good stories, but the quiet devastations that remake you from the inside out. The betrayal that taught you to trust your own instincts, the loss that revealed what could never be lost, the illness that introduced you to the body as ally rather than enemy. Carl Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but he failed to mention that this privilege is usually purchased with the currency of necessary suffering. Not suffering for its own sake, but suffering as the fire that burns away everything that is not essential. The alchemical process that transforms lead into gold, wounds into wisdom, pain into presence. If you carry this aura, your biography likely reads like a series of initiations. Each crisis that didn't destroy you added another layer to your capacity to hold others' pain without being overwhelmed by it. Each time you chose growth over comfort, you developed what Pema Chodron calls the wisdom of no escape, the ability to be fully present with what is rather than what you wish were. This is why your presence unsettles others. They sense in you someone who has been broken and reassembled, not into the same pattern, but into something more resilient and more real. Your scars have become sacred geography, not wounds you hide, but maps you can offer to others who find themselves in similar territories of transformation. The initiated understand that pain is not punishment, but information. Trauma is not pathology, but unprocessed wisdom. The body keeps the score not to torment us, but to teach us the difference between genuine safety and familiar patterns that masquerade as safety. Your presence carries the frequency of someone who has learned to metabolize suffering into compassion, confusion into curiosity, fear into fierce tenderness. This is not spiritual bypassing, avoiding pain through premature transcendence. This is spiritual embodiment, finding the sacred within the human rather than despite it. There's a reason people either love you immediately or find reasons to dislike you before they know you. Your energy acts as a mirror, reflecting back to others the relationship they have with their own authenticity. Those who have made peace with their complexity are drawn to yours. Those who are still at war with their own depth are threatened by the reminder of what they've abandoned. This mirror function is not something you consciously choose to activate. It's simply what happens when someone who has stopped pretending encounters others who are still performing. Your refusal to engage in surface-level interactions forces others to choose, go deeper, or go away. Many choose to go away, and this can create a peculiar form of loneliness, surrounded by people but understood by few. The psychological principle of projection explains part of this phenomenon. When others encounter someone who embodies qualities they've rejected in themselves, emotional depth, spiritual sensitivity, authentic expression, they often project their own judgment of these qualities onto you. You become too intense, too serious, too much. Not because you are objectively these things, but because you represent the parts of themselves they've learned to suppress. But for those ready to meet their own depth, your presence becomes a permission slip to stop hiding. The executive who finds himself talking about his childhood dreams in a 5-minute conversation with you. The mother who admits she doesn't know who she is beyond her roles. The teenager who recognizes they're not broken, just different. This is the gift and burden of being a living mirror. You cannot help but reflect truth. The initiated learn to hold this mirror function with compassion rather than judgment. You understand that others' reactions to you are information about their internal landscape, not necessarily about you. This allows you to remain open-hearted even when others' responses are defensive or hostile. You recognize that being triggered by authenticity is often the first step in remembering how to be authentic. There's a particular form of loneliness that comes with being able to see into multiple dimensions of reality simultaneously. You live in the ordinary world, paying bills, buying groceries, navigating traffic, but you also inhabit the symbolic realm where every interaction carries deeper meaning. Every coincidence is synchronicity. Every conversation has the potential to be a spiritual encounter. This creates what anthropologists call liminal existence, living between worlds, belonging fully to none. You're too spiritual for the purely material world, too grounded for the purely spiritual world, too complex for simple solutions, too genuine for surface interactions. This is the sacred loneliness of the bridge person, the one who translates between realities. Small talk becomes almost unbearable, not because you think you're superior, but because your nervous system has been recalibrated to register depth as safety. Surface interactions feel like wearing a costume that no longer fits. You find yourself listening for the subtext, responding to the emotion beneath the words, sensing the questions people aren't asking. This can create social isolation, but it also creates the possibility for encounters of profound intimacy with those who are ready to meet you in the deeper waters. A 5-minute conversation with a stranger at a bus stop becomes more meaningful than hours of chit-chat at a dinner party. So a text exchange with a friend who really sees you nourishes your soul more than a room full of applause. The mystic tradition speaks of this as the night sea journey, the hero's descent into the depths before returning to the surface world transformed. But for many who carry this aura, the journey isn't linear. You learn to navigate between depths and surface, moving fluidly between the world of symbolic meaning and the world of practical necessity. This requires developing what could be called bilingual consciousness, the ability to speak both the language of the soul and the language of society without losing your essential nature in translation. You learn when to reveal your depth and when to protect it, when to bridge worlds for others and when to honor your own need for understanding. With this presence comes a responsibility that was never requested but cannot be denied. You become a walking invitation for others to remember their own depth, not through preaching or teaching, but through the simple act of being unabashedly yourself. This is service without sermon, healing without technique, transformation without agenda. The responsibility is subtle but profound. Your energy affects others whether you intend it to or not. Your authentic presence gives others permission to drop their masks. Your comfort with intensity allows others to acknowledge their own complex emotions. Your integration of shadow and light shows others that wholeness is possible. This can feel overwhelming, particularly when you recognize how many people are starving for authentic connection. You may find yourself becoming a confidant for strangers, a safe harbor for the emotionally shipwrecked, a living reminder of possibilities that others have forgotten. The challenge is learning to serve from fullness rather than emptiness, to be available without becoming depleted. The ancient concept of bodhisattva, one who vows to serve the awakening of all beings, takes on practical meaning in daily interactions. You recognize that every encounter is an opportunity for mutual awakening, but you also understand that true service sometimes means healthy boundaries, that saying no to surface connections creates space for soul connections. Your presence becomes what Thich Nhat Hanh calls engaged spirituality, not retreating from the world to find peace, but bringing peace into the world through embodied presence. You don't need to announce your spiritual beliefs or display your wisdom. Your very being becomes the message, your energy becomes the teaching, your authentic presence becomes the gift. They call you intense, and they're right. But what they don't understand is that this intensity isn't manufactured drama or emotional overwhelm. It's the natural state of someone who experiences life in high definition, while most others have learned to live in black and white. Your intensity is simply what happens when someone refuses to numb themselves to the fullness of human experience. This creates a curious social dynamic. In a culture that prizes surface-level pleasantness and emotional regulation, your natural depth can feel threatening. You're labeled too much, not because you're objectively excessive, but because your emotional range reveals how much others have learned to compress themselves. Your willingness to feel fully makes others uncomfortable with their own emotional numbness. The psychological research on emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between subtle gradations of feeling, shows that individuals with higher emotional complexity have greater resilience and deeper capacity for empathy. But in a society that prefers emotional simplicity, this complexity can be pathologized rather than recognized as a gift. Your clarity about human nature, systems of oppression, spiritual truth, or emotional dynamics isn't cynicism. It's the result of paying attention. While others look away from uncomfortable truths, you look directly. While others choose comfort over growth, you choose growth over comfort. This clarity can make you seem critical when you're actually just perceptive, intense when you're actually just awake. The initiated learn to carry this clarity with tenderness rather than superiority. You understand that not everyone is ready for the level of truth you can see, and that timing is crucial in sharing insight. You develop the discernment to know when your clarity serves and when it overwhelms, when to speak your truth, and when to embody it silently. This clarity extends to your relationship with yourself. You see through your own patterns, recognize your own shadow, acknowledge your own limitations with the same uncompromising honesty you bring to everything else. This self-awareness can be both liberating and isolating. Liberating because it frees you from self-deception, isolating because it makes it difficult to relate to others who are still invested in their own illusions. The revolution you carry is not fought with words or actions, but with presence itself. In a world addicted to doing, your commitment to being becomes radical. In a culture obsessed with having, your embrace of enough becomes revolutionary. In a society that worships becoming, your acceptance of what is becomes transformative. This is not passive spirituality or detached observation. This is the active choice to embody the change you wish to see, rather than demanding that others change first. Your presence becomes a seed of possibility that doesn't argue with others' limitations, but demonstrates alternatives through lived example. Recent research in systems theory and field dynamics suggests that individual transformation can have far-reaching effects on entire social networks. When one person in a system shifts into greater authenticity and presence, it creates what physicists call morphic resonance, a field effect that makes it easier for others to access similar states of being. You may have noticed this in your own life. As you've become more authentic, others around you have been challenged or inspired to become more authentic as well. As you've learned to hold space for difficult emotions, others have begun to trust you with their own complexity. As you've stopped pretending to be smaller than you are, others have begun to question their own self-diminishment. This revolution happens through what could be called presence activism, showing up fully in whatever circumstances life presents, rather than waiting for ideal conditions to be yourself. It's the mother who models emotional intelligence in grocery store tantrums, the employee who brings integrity to corporate environments, the friend who offers depth in surface relationships. The ripple effects are often invisible but profound, the conversation that shifts someone's perspective, the moment of authentic connection that reminds someone they're not alone, the example of emotional courage that gives someone permission to feel their own feelings. These are the small revolutions that change the world from the inside out. This journey we've traveled together, through the territories of invisible presence, sacred loneliness, mirror consciousness, and embodied authenticity, has not been about becoming something new. It has been about remembering what you have always been, but perhaps forgot in the process of learning to survive in a world that often rewards conformity over authenticity. The aura you carry, this presence that others sense but cannot name, is not an achievement to be earned but a birthright to be reclaimed. It emerges not from perfection but from integration, not from transcendence but from embodiment, not from escaping your humanity but from embracing it fully. If you have recognized yourself in these words, if you have felt the resonance of someone speaking your hidden language, then consider this moment a form of spiritual remembering. Not remembering facts or techniques, but remembering the feeling of being fully yourself without apology, without explanation, without the exhausting effort of trying to be someone else. The ritual of remembrance is simple. It requires only that you stop abandoning yourself to make others comfortable. Stop dimming your light to avoid triggering others' shadows. Stop apologizing for the depth that is your natural way of being. Stop trying to translate your complexity into simplicity for those who aren't ready to meet you in the depths. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or inconsiderate. It means becoming so grounded in your own authenticity that you can offer genuine presence rather than performed acceptability. It means trusting that the right people will be drawn to your truth rather than trying to make the wrong people comfortable with your lies. The ancient mystery schools taught that the greatest spiritual achievement was not to become superhuman, but to become fully human, to integrate all aspects of yourself, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, wisdom and uncertainty, into a presence that doesn't need to prove itself because it knows itself. Your aura, this invisible presence that shifts rooms and stirs souls, is the signature of someone who has completed this integration. Not perfectly. Integration is an ongoing process, not a final destination, but authentically, courageously, with a willingness to show up as you are rather than as you think you should be. In a world where most people are performing versions of themselves, your commitment to simply being yourself becomes a beacon for others who have forgotten their own essence. Your presence gives permission for others to stop performing and start inhabiting themselves. Your energy becomes a tuning fork that reminds others of frequencies they thought they had lost. This is not a burden you have chosen, but a gift you have received. Not something you must do, but something you already are. The recognition of this gift doesn't make you special in the sense of better than others, but it does make you specific, designed for particular forms of service that only you can offer. And so, as you move forward from this moment of remembrance, carry with you this understanding. The presence you emanate is not your achievement but your essence. The aura that others sense in you is not something you have created, but something you have finally stopped hiding. You are not like the others, and this is not a problem to be solved but a frequency to be honored. The truth that has been hidden until now is simply this: there is nothing wrong with being exactly who you are, and everything right with offering that authenticity as a gift to a world that desperately needs reminders of what it means to be genuinely human. The initiated know that the greatest revolution begins with the radical act of coming home to yourself. And you, regardless of what others may have told you about being too much or too different, are exactly what this world needs you to be. Trust the frequency you carry. Honor the presence you embody. And remember, you were never meant to be like the others. You were meant to be yourself fully and fearlessly, as a living invitation for others to remember who they truly are beneath the masks they've learned to wear. This is your remembrance. This is your return. This is your recognition of the truth that has been yours all along. Before you sleep tonight, place your hand on your heart and feel the rhythm that has been yours since before your first breath. In that rhythm is the signature of your unique frequency. Let it remind you that you carry medicine this world needs, especially when you feel most alone in carrying it.